I sat on the cold, creaky floor of my empty apartment, surrounded by piles of overdue bills and a single flickering lamp. The silence was deafening, except for the occasional drip from a leaky faucet in the corner. The place smelled faintly of mildew, and the chipped paint on the walls reminded me just how far I'd fallen. Once upon a time, I thought I had it all: a husband, a future, a plan. Caleb and I used to dream big together. He was ambitious, charming, and full of promises. And I was the one who stood by his side, working long hours to support him while he built something great. I was a safety net, his cheerleader, his everything. Or so I thought. The memory of that day played in my mind like a cruel, stuck record. I'd come home early, excited to surprise Caleb with dinner. Instead, I found him sitting across from Vanessa in our living room. She was beautiful, younger, and dripping in wealth. Everything I wasn't. "I'm sorry, Mia," Caleb had said, his voice devoid of the warmth I'd once adored. "This isn't working anymore. I need more out of life, and Vanessa, well, she understands my vision." I'd begged him, humiliated myself, asking him to reconsider. I reminded him of the years I spent supporting his career, the sacrifices I made. But his response was cold and calculated. "You're holding me back, Mia. I can't afford to be weighed down anymore." Those words replayed in my head now, cutting deeper every time. After Caleb threw me out, I had nowhere to go. I scraped together enough to rent this dingy apartment and got whatever jobs I could find, waitressing during the day and cleaning offices at night. I didn't have the luxury to cry all the time, even though I wanted to. I had to keep moving just to survive. I tried to avoid social media, but sometimes curiosity got the best of me. Scrolling through Vanessa's glittering posts felt like picking at a scab that wouldn't heal. There they were, smiling on exotic vacations, dining in five-star restaurants, and flaunting designer clothes. "Power couple goals," one caption read, making me want to throw my phone across the room. Meanwhile, I was counting coins at the grocery store, deciding between a loaf of bread or a carton of eggs. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, wondering how my life had gone so wrong. How did I go from dreaming about a future with Caleb to barely scraping by? I thought about calling him just once, maybe to scream, maybe to beg. I wasn't sure, but every time I reached for my phone, I stopped myself. He had made his choice. I had to live with it. The thing about life, though, is that karma has its own schedule. It started with small whispers, a friend mentioning Caleb's business wasn't doing as well as he'd claimed. Then one day, I overheard two of his former coworkers gossiping. "Did you hear about Vanessa? Apparently she's been making Caleb fund all her shopping sprees. He's bleeding money." One said. I shouldn't have cared, but I couldn't help it. A small, dark part of me felt vindicated. From what I pieced together, Vanessa had turned out to be a master manipulator. She pushed Caleb into extravagant spending, isolating him from his friends and advisors. She'd gained access to his accounts, draining him of both money and dignity. Their picture-perfect life began to crumble, and rumors swirled about Caleb's failing business ventures. People whispered about bad investments, unpaid debts, and deals falling through. The man who once called me a burden was now drowning in the very life he'd thrown me away to pursue. But none of it made me feel better. If anything, it reminded me of how easily I had been discarded, just like he was being discarded now. The only difference was, I didn't have anyone to lean on when it happened to me. One night, after another long shift and another eviction notice slipped under my door, I hit my breaking point. The stress, the loneliness, the anger, it all crashed down on me at once. I walked out onto the fire escape, the cool night air brushing against my tear-streaked face. The stars looked so calm, so indifferent to my suffering. I wanted to scream at the universe, demand an explanation for why my life had turned out this way. Instead, I whispered to the sky, my voice trembling. If I could just do it all again. If I could start over. I'd make sure I never needed anyone like Caleb. I'd make sure I could stand on my own. I closed my eyes, the tears streaming freely now. "Please," I begged, though I didn't know who I was talking to. "Give me one more chance, just one. I'll do it right this time." When I finally went back inside and collapsed onto the thin mattress on the floor, I felt a strange sense of peace, wash over me. I didn't know why, but for the first time in years, I fell asleep without nightmares. Little did I know, everything was about to change. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window, the warmth of it brushing against my face. It felt strange, almost too soft, like I drifted into some unreal dream. My eyes fluttered open, and the first thing I noticed was the smell, a mix of Caleb's cologne and the faint aroma of fresh linens. This wasn't the dingy apartment I'd struggled in for years. No cracked walls, no faint mildew smell. It was our old bedroom, the room we'd shared in the first year of our marriage. Back when I thought I was living a fairy tale, I sat up slowly, my heart racing, as my gaze darted around the room. The soft cream-colored walls, the neatly folded quilt at the foot of the bed, the framed photos of us on the dresser. It was all exactly how I remembered it. Too exact. I scrambled out of bed and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. The date on the screen nearly made my knees buckle. It was the day after our wedding. No, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my chest. This isn't possible. I rushed to the mirror, expecting to see a worn, tired face staring back at me. Instead, I saw the younger version of myself, my skin unlined, my eyes brighter than I'd seen them in years. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. At first, I sat frozen in disbelief, trying to make sense of what had happened. Memories of my first life came flooding back in vivid detail. Caleb's betrayal, Vanessa's arrival, the years of struggle that followed. I couldn't shake the pain of it, even though it felt a lifetime away now. Then I heard Caleb's voice downstairs, cheerful and carefree. "Mia, are you up? I made coffee." Hearing his voice sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was clarity. I had been given a second chance. And suddenly, all the things I once missed or ignored about Caleb became glaringly obvious. His charm wasn't genuine. It was a performance. His grand dreams weren't about us. They were about him. His promises of a bright future. Empty words designed to keep me supporting his ambitions. And yet, as I stared into the mirror, I knew I couldn't confront him. Not yet. If I wanted to rewrite my story, I needed time. Time to plan. Time to prepare. "Mia?" Caleb called again, his voice tinged with curiosity. "I'm coming," I replied, forcing a brightness into my tone that I didn't feel. I smoothed my hair, plastered on a smile, and headed downstairs, my mind already spinning with plans. Over the next few days, I let everything unfold as it had before. Caleb was sweet and attentive, talking endlessly about his plans to start his own company. He praised me for being the perfect partner, always so supportive of his dreams. I played the part of the doting wife, nodding along and agreeing with him. But this time, I wasn't blinded by love. I saw through the cracks in his facade. The way he talked about his ambitions like they were already guaranteed, the way he dismissed my ideas or concerns as unimportant. And then there were the moments of selfishness I had once brushed aside. When I offered to help with something, he'd accept without a second thought, never considering how much I was already juggling. When I mentioned my own goals or dreams, he'd change the subject back to himself. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't push back. I let him think I was the same naive girl who would follow him blindly. All the while, I was carefully tracking the timeline in my mind. I knew when Vanessa would enter his life, when he would start to drift away, and when he would eventually betray me. This time, I wouldn't be caught off guard. While Caleb dreamed aloud about his future empire, I began quietly building my own. I started journaling everything I remembered from my first life. Key stock market trends, cryptocurrency booms, major sporting events, every headline, every big opportunity that had stuck in my mind, I wrote it down. At first, I felt ridiculous. Could I really use this knowledge to change my life? But the more I wrote, the more I realized how much power I held. I wasn't just living in the past, I was rewriting it. I opened a secret bank account and funneled small amounts of money into it, careful not to raise Caleb's suspicions. Using the notes from my journal, I made my first investments in stocks I knew would skyrocket within the year. I also began researching sports betting. It wasn't something I'd ever done before, but I remembered the outcomes of a few major games. A small bet here, a bigger one there. Every move was calculated, and every win built my confidence. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about the control. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was steering my own ship instead of clinging to someone else's. In the quiet hours, I thought about Caleb and Vanessa. I remembered the pain of their betrayal, the years I spent trying to rebuild myself after they shattered my life. But now, with the second chance, I realized something. Their choices didn't have to define me. This time, I wasn't going to fight for Caleb's attention. I wasn't going to beg him to choose me or stay. I wasn't going to let his betrayal break me. I was going to let him play out his story exactly as he had before. And when the time came, I'd be ready to walk away. Not as the broken, abandoned woman he left behind, but as someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more powerful. But I didn't know how the second chance had come to me or why, but I wasn't going to waste it. This time, I was rewriting the ending. I still remember the thrill of logging into my new secret bank account for the first time. It felt like taking the first real step toward reclaiming my life. With the timeline of my first life burned into my memory, I began investing small amounts of money in companies I knew were destined to become giants. Tech startups that no one paid attention to yet. Those were the gold mines. I bought shares of an emerging tech company that would eventually dominate the market, knowing I'd sit back and watch its stock price soar in the years to come. Then, there was Bitcoin. Back then, people were either clueless or dismissive about cryptocurrencies. But I wasn't. I remembered the headlines of Bitcoin skyrocketing, and this time, I wasn't going to miss the opportunity. It started small, just a few dollars here and there from the household budget that Caleb barely noticed. I made sure to keep my excitement under control when the investments began to grow. The small thrill of watching my account balance creep higher became my secret joy. Caleb had no idea, and I intended to keep it that way. I wasn't just building wealth, I was building freedom. The money wasn't the only thing I gained, though. I felt my confidence growing with each calculated move. The woman I used to be, timid, unsure, and dependent, was disappearing, replaced by someone who made her own decisions and didn't need anyone's permission. I learned to place bets subtly through online platforms Caleb didn't know I used. I was careful not to bet too much or too often, ensuring nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Every dollar I earned went straight into my secret account, creating a financial safety net that no one could take from me. As my bank account grew, so did my hunger for knowledge. I spent my free time studying everything I could about finance, real estate, and business management. I devoured books, listened to podcasts, and signed up for free online courses. In my first life, I'd always left the complicated stuff to Caleb, trusting him to handle it. Now I knew better. The more I learned, the more empowered I felt. I started creating a blueprint for my future, one that didn't include Caleb or anyone else holding me back. I wanted to build something lasting, something that was entirely mine. I didn't know exactly what form it would take yet, but I was determined to succeed. Reconnecting with old friends and mentors was another step in my transformation. People I'd lost touch with in my first life became part of my support system in this one. I reached out to an old college professor who'd always believed in me, and their advice helped me refine my goals. I also rekindled friendships with people who reminded me of who I was before Caleb convinced me I wasn't enough. Vanessa's arrival in Caleb's life was inevitable. I knew it was only a matter of time before she appeared, her perfect hair and designer heels turning Caleb's head and sealing my fate, at least in my first life. But this time, I wasn't going to sit idly by. I hired a private investigator to dig into Vanessa's past. At first, I felt guilty for snooping, but as the PI delivered report after report, that guilt melted away. Vanessa wasn't just a charming, wealthy woman who happened to catch Caleb's eye. She was a predator. The investigator uncovered a string of ex-husbands, all wealthy, all left in financial ruin after Vanessa manipulated and drained them. She had a pattern: target a successful man, convince him she was his missing piece, and then leave him with nothing after a nasty divorce settlement. Each time, she moved on to her next victim with no remorse. Seeing the evidence in black and white filled me with a strange sense of vindication. It wasn't my imagination or my insecurities. Vanessa was dangerous. She'd done this before, and she would do it again. Caleb was nothing more than her next mark. I didn't confront him with the information. Not yet. The time would come, but for now, I let the knowledge simmer. Knowing her true nature gave me an edge, and I intended to use it. While Caleb rambled on about his dreams of success and hinted at the sacrifices I needed to make to help him achieve them, I quietly smiled and nodded, all the while working toward my own goals. He didn't notice the small changes in me, how I stopped asking for his advice or seeking his approval, how I started spending more time at the library or on my laptop, or how I made sure to keep my plans hidden. For the first time, I wasn't living in Caleb's shadow. I was stepping into my own light, even if he hadn't realized it yet. And when Vanessa finally showed up and Caleb inevitably betrayed me, I wouldn't be caught off guard. I wouldn't be the broken woman he left behind. I'd be ready. I spent my days planting seeds for a future Caleb wouldn't see coming. Using the money I'd earned from investments, betting, and side hustles, I began purchasing undervalued properties. I knew from my first life exactly which neighborhoods would undergo massive transformations in the coming years. Old houses on the verge of being condemned, I bought them. Vacant lots no one cared about, I scooped them up. It felt like playing chess with time, positioning myself for moves I knew would lead to checkmate. The real power, though, wasn't just in the properties, it was in knowledge. I secured a part-time job at a small but reputable law firm in town, claiming I wanted to learn the basics of contracts for our future business ventures. In reality, I was arming myself with tools I'd need when the inevitable storm hit. I devoured every bit of information I could about property law, divorce settlements, and contract loopholes. Every document I reviewed, every conversation I overheard at the firm became part of my arsenal. The irony wasn't lost on me that Caleb's constant talk about building an empire had pushed me to quietly start building one of my own. The difference was, mine wasn't built on promises and charm. It was built on hard work and strategy. Caleb's dreams remained as grand and vague as ever. He talked about starting his own company, of taking risks that would pay off big someday. In our first life, I'd have nodded enthusiastically, offering up everything I had to support him. This time, I had no intention of playing the role of his safety net. One night over dinner, Caleb brought up his latest scheme. Caleb's business was already on the rise and he was making decent money, but that wasn't enough for his greedy nature. He wanted to pull money from our joint savings to invest in a risky startup idea. In my first life, I'd been too eager to please, too afraid to say no. But this time, I smiled calmly and said, I think we need to focus on stability right now. Let's wait until we're in a better position before making big investments. Caleb's face fell, and for a moment I saw the flicker of irritation in his eyes. Mia, you have to think long term. This is how people build wealth, by taking risks. I get that, I said, keeping my voice even. But we can't build wealth if we go back to barely getting by. Let's wait until we're more comfortable. He huffed and let it go. For now. What he didn't realize was that I'd already moved most of my savings into my secret account. Even if he pushed harder, there was nothing for him to take. As the weeks went on, and his money tied up in his business, I continued to politely decline his requests for financial support. Caleb grew more frustrated, but he didn't suspect a thing. In his mind, I was still the same woman who would do anything for him, and I let him think that. The years swept by like a dream. I had accumulated a small fortune in my secret account, and Caleb, well, just like before, he used his opportunist nature and grew his business into a very decent and successful company. The timeline of my first life played out in my mind like a movie I'd watched 100 times. I knew exactly when Vanessa would make her grand entrance. At a networking event Caleb attended every year, she'd charm him with her effortless grace, her perfect smile, her subtle but undeniable aura of wealth and power. And Caleb, ever the opportunist, would fall for it. I watched the days tick by, knowing the betrayal was just around the corner. I could feel the tension building in Caleb, the restless energy that signaled he was looking for something or someone new. It still hurt. Even with all the knowledge I had, even with all the steps I'd taken to prepare, it still stung to know he would trade me in without a second thought. But this time, I was ready. This time, I wasn't clinging to the hope that he'd choose me. I was focused on choosing myself. I feigned ignorance as Caleb became more distant, spending longer hours at work and attending more events to network. I even helped him pick out suits and ties, smiling as if I didn't know exactly where he was going and who he was hoping to impress. If he noticed the slight shift in me, the quiet confidence, the subtle withdrawal of my emotional support, he didn't mention it. The night I discovered Caleb's flirtation with Vanessa was the moment everything crystallized for me. I knew it was coming for weeks, but seeing it with my own eyes was still a gut punch. I tagged along to a networking event, one I hadn't attended in my first life. I wasn't there to make a scene, I was there to observe. Sure enough, there she was, Vanessa. She looked exactly as I remembered, all sleek hair and dazzling smiles, her laughter cutting through the room like a knife. Caleb, of course, was by her side, leaning in too close, smiling too wide. He didn't notice me watching from across the room, and that was fine by me. I wasn't ready to confront him, not yet. I wanted to gather as much ammunition as possible before making my move. After the event, I began quietly documenting everything: his texts, his late nights, his sudden interest in spending more time at the office. I saved receipts, emails, and anything else that could prove his infidelity and deceit. I wasn't planning to use it yet, but I wanted to be prepared for when the time came. That night, as Caleb slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling and felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, anger, and, most surprising of all, relief. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment where I could finally say goodbye to the life I'd once thought I wanted. I didn't need Caleb to love me. I didn't need him to stay. In fact, I was counting on him leaving. Because when he did, I wouldn't be the broken, abandoned woman he expected. I'd be someone far stronger, far smarter, and far more capable than he could ever imagine. This time, I was ready. I saw it coming long before it happened. Caleb's late nights at work, the sudden extra effort he put into his appearance, and the barely concealed excitement in his voice whenever he mentioned meeting potential business partners. It all pointed to one person: Vanessa. She swept into his life like a storm, all polished charm and promises of glittering opportunities. Caleb fell for her hook, line, and sinker, dazzled by her connections and the image of success she painted for him. He didn't see the cracks beneath the surface, the same cracks I knew all too well from my first life. When I finally confronted him, it felt almost surreal. The two of us sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy. I calmly asked, "How long has it been going on?" Caleb didn't even try to deny it. "Mia, I think we both know this isn't working," he said, his tone cold and detached. "Vanessa understands what I need. She's what I deserve." I felt my stomach twist at his words, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I forced a small, calm smile. "What you deserve," I echoed. "Interesting." He misread my reaction as indifference and pressed on. "You've been holding me back, Mia. You're not ambitious enough. Vanessa and I have a vision for the future, and honestly, you're just a burden." I should have been devastated, but I wasn't. I had been preparing for this moment for months, and hearing those words only solidified my resolve. Caleb didn't know it yet, but this time, I wasn't the one being left behind. He was. In my first life, I'd begged him to reconsider. I'd cried, shouted, and tried to remind him of everything we'd been through together. It had only given him more power to hurt me. This time, I refused to give him that satisfaction. "If that's how you feel," I said calmly, "then I won't stand in your way." Caleb blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, you're not even going to try to fight for this?" I shook my head. "Why would I fight for someone who doesn't want me? You've made your choice, Caleb. Now you'll have to live with it." He didn't know how to respond. I could see the confusion and a hint of regret flicker across his face, but I didn't let it affect me. I'd made my decision long before this moment. Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly to finalize our separation. I let him think he was winning, that he'd come out on top. What he didn't realize was that most of my assets were safely tucked away in secret accounts he couldn't touch. I had no intention of letting him drain me financially again the way he had before. By the time the divorce papers were signed, I had everything I needed to move forward, and Caleb was none the wiser. Vanessa's arrival had been predictable, but I also knew her eventual exit would be just as dramatic. She had a pattern, after all: charm wealthy men, drain their resources, and leave them in the dust. This time, I decided to speed up the process. Using a pseudonym, I began anonymously leaking Vanessa's history to key figures in Caleb's social and professional circles. I sent emails, made phone calls, and shared carefully curated documents that painted a clear picture of who Vanessa really was. Photos of her with her previous victims, articles about her past divorces, and even whispers of legal disputes she'd been involved in. It was all there. I didn't do it out of spite, though I'd be lying if I said it wasn't satisfying. I did it because I wanted Caleb to see the truth for himself. I wanted him to understand what he'd thrown me away for. As the rumors began to spread, I sat back and watched. I knew Vanessa would eventually show her true colors. It was only a matter of time. With Caleb and Vanessa's lives playing out exactly as I remembered, I focused on my own goals. My investments were thriving, and I had started expanding my portfolio into real estate and small businesses. Each move I made brought me closer to the independence and stability I dreamed of. Occasionally, I'd hear snippets about Caleb's life through mutual acquaintances or social media. His relationship with Vanessa, once the picture of perfection, was beginning to crack. She was demanding, manipulative, and constantly pressuring him to spend more money. Caleb's finances, already stretched thin from his poor business decisions, were crumbling under the weight of Vanessa's extravagance. Meanwhile, Vanessa was losing her grip on the carefully curated image she'd built. The whispers I'd started about her past had grown louder, and Caleb's friends and colleagues were beginning to distance themselves. Even Caleb, blinded as he was by her charm, couldn't ignore the mounting pressure. It was strangely satisfying to see it all play out, but I didn't let myself dwell on it for too long. My focus was on my future, not their downfall. One evening, as I sat in my new spacious apartment overlooking the city, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on how far I'd come. The woman I was now, a confident, successful investor with a growing business empire, was worlds apart from the timid wife who had once clung to Caleb's every word. I knew there was still more work to be done, more steps to take toward the life I truly wanted. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. My life wasn't defined by Caleb or his choices anymore. It was defined by me. As for Caleb and Vanessa, their story wasn't over yet. But when the final chapter came, I knew exactly where I'd be, standing tall, watching from a distance, and knowing I'd already won. Starting my own company felt like diving headfirst into uncharted waters, but with every calculated move, I gained confidence. Using the wealth I'd built through strategic investments and my knowledge of future trends, I founded a company that merged my passions and skills, focusing on sustainable, innovative products that resonated with modern consumers. At first, it was a slow climb. I worked tirelessly, often into the early hours of the morning, fine-tuning every detail of my brand. But once the foundation was set, everything began to fall into place. My company gained traction quickly, thanks to my ability to predict market shifts and consumer behavior. The strategies that failed businesses overlooked were opportunities I seized, turning them into gold mines. Within a year, my brand became a household name, praised for its authenticity and cutting-edge approach. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Networking events that once made me feel invisible were now places where people sought my advice and valued my input. The timid woman Caleb had dismissed as a burden was gone. I was someone new, someone powerful. Moving into my new home felt like stepping into a dream I hadn't dared to believe in during my first life. It was a sprawling, modern house in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, with wide windows that overlooked the skyline. Every room was filled with light, a stark contrast to the shadows I'd lived in for so long. Decorating it became a deeply personal process. I didn't just want it to look beautiful, I wanted it to feel like mine. The walls bore reminders of my journey. A framed page from the journal where I'd first written down the names of key investments, a small display of my earliest stock certificates, and a shadow box containing a winning sports bet slip. It wasn't about showing off. It was about remembering where I came from and how far I'd come. One particular corner of the living room became my favorite space. It held a cozy chair, a bookshelf filled with business books and journals, and a single framed quote, "You are your own foundation." It was a mantra I'd adopted early in the second life, one that had carried me through every challenge. For years, I'd lived in the shadow of someone else's ambitions, believing my worth was tied to how much I could give to someone else. But now, I wanted to be the person I'd needed during those dark times. So I started a mentorship program for young women, teaching them the lessons I'd learned about financial independence, resilience, and self-worth. At first, it was just a handful of mentees, women who reminded me of myself, ambitious but unsure, talented but undervalued. I shared my story with them, not as a cautionary tale, but as a proof that they could overcome whatever life threw their way. The program grew faster than I'd anticipated. It became a platform for workshops, networking events, and even a scholarship fund for women pursuing entrepreneurship. Seeing these women thrive filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just building a life for myself, I was helping others do the same. And that, more than anything else, felt like success. While I built my empire, Caleb's world crumbled piece by piece. At first, he and Vanessa seemed to live the perfect life. Lavish parties, expensive vacations, and endless displays of wealth on social media. But cracks began to show as Vanessa's true nature came to light. She was a master manipulator, just as I'd known she would be. She convinced Caleb to pour money into extravagant purchases and risky investments, all while slowly draining his finances behind his back. The rumors I'd seeded about her gold-digging past only added fuel to the fire, making it harder for Caleb to maintain his professional reputation. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Caleb's business ventures collapsed under the weight of his reckless spending, and Vanessa, true to form, moved on to her next target. She left him with nothing but debt, a tarnished reputation, and the bitter realization that he'd been played. I heard about his downfall through mutual acquaintances and industry whispers. There was no gloating, no grand moment of satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement that karma had done its work. Caleb had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my new home, looking out at the city lights, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on everything that had led me here. My journey hadn't been easy, but every struggle, every betrayal, every hard-earned victory had shaped me into the woman I was now. I thought about Caleb and Vanessa, not with anger, but with a sense of detachment. They were part of my story, yes, but they no longer defined it. My life was bigger than them now, bigger than the pain they'd caused me. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. It started with a knock at my office door, the kind of knock you only hear when someone is too nervous to come in but too desperate to stay away. I glanced up from my desk, expecting one of my assistants. Instead, I froze. There he was. Caleb. He looked nothing like the man who'd thrown me out of his life with such arrogance and confidence. His tailored suits had been replaced by a wrinkled shirt and worn-out shoes. The sparkle in his eyes, the one that once drew me in, was gone, replaced by something pitiful: desperation. "Mia," he said, his voice strained and uncertain, "I had to see you." For a moment, I just stared at him. The memories of the past flooded back, but they didn't hurt the way they once did. I wasn't that broken woman anymore. I was someone new, someone stronger. "What do you want, Caleb?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He stepped inside, his eyes darting around my office. The high ceilings, the polished floors, the walls adorned with awards and framed articles about my success. I could see the shock on his face, the disbelief that the woman he once dismissed as a burden had built all of this. I need your help," he finally said, his voice cracking. "I made mistakes, Mia. Big ones. Vanessa. She left me. She drained everything I had, and now I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me stop you right there. You want me to help you rebuild your life after you destroyed mine?" He flinched at the bluntness of my words, but didn't deny them. I motioned for Caleb to sit, and for a moment I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. But I wasn't offering him comfort. I was giving myself a chance to finally say everything I'd held back in my first life. "You know," I began, leaning back in my chair, "I saw this coming. The moment you chose Vanessa, I knew exactly how it would end. And I let it happen." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I knew who Vanessa was before you ever met her. I knew her history, her pattern. And instead of warning you or fighting to keep you, I stepped aside. I let you make your choice because I wanted you to see for yourself what you gave up." Caleb looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to process my words. "I rebuilt my life, Caleb," I continued, "from scratch. Everything you see here, this office, this company, this success, it's all mine. I didn't need you to save me, and I definitely don't need you now." "But Mia," he pleaded, "I've changed. I know I was wrong to leave you. I know I hurt you, and I regret it every single day. Please just give me a chance to prove I can do better." I shook my head, my voice firm, but calm. "This isn't about whether you've changed, Caleb. It's about the fact that I've moved on. You're not a part of my life anymore. And you never will be." Caleb slumped in his chair, the weight of my words sinking in. Vanessa ruined me, he said quietly, his voice laced with bitterness. She took everything, my money, my reputation, my friends. She played me, Mia. She used me and threw me away. I raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by his self-pity. And you're surprised? You chose her. You believed her lies and turned your back on the one person who truly cared about you. What did you think was going to happen? He looked down at his hands, shame flickering across his face. I thought I was building a better life. No, Caleb, I said, my voice cold. You were chasing an illusion. You wanted wealth and status more than you wanted a real partnership, and Vanessa gave you exactly what you deserved. I expected to feel triumphant, vindicated even. But what I felt instead was nothing. Caleb's regret didn't erase the years of pain he'd caused me, and watching him crumble didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. If anything, it reinforced how far I'd come. I wasn't the same woman who needed his validation or begged for his love. I was free. Caleb looked up at me, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mia, I'm begging you. Please. I don't have anyone else. I stood, signaling the end of our conversation. That's not my problem, Caleb. You made your choices, and now you're living with them. I've spent too much time rebuilding my life to let you drag me back into yours. He rose slowly, as if the weight of my rejection was too much to bear. So that's it? After everything we've been through, you're just going to turn your back on me? I met his gaze, unflinching. You turned your back on me first, and the woman you threw away doesn't exist anymore. I'm not here to save you, Caleb. You're on your own. As he walked out of my office, shoulders slumped and head bowed, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. This was the man who had once shattered my heart, but now he was just a distant chapter in my story, a cautionary tale of what happens when you take someone for granted. That evening, as I sat on the balcony of my home, I reflected on the encounter. For so long, I'd imagined what I'd say to Caleb if I ever saw him again. I thought it would be a moment of triumph, that I'd revel in his downfall, but instead it was just closure. I had built a life without him, a life that was full and meaningful and entirely mine. Caleb's plea for help didn't shake me because I didn't need him anymore. I had let go of the anger and the pain, and in doing so, I'd found something far more valuable: peace. As the city lights twinkled below me, I raised a glass to myself and to the life I'd fought so hard to create. Caleb's chapter was over, and a new one was just beginning. The final chapter with Caleb came quietly, like a soft closing of a door that had been left ajar for too long. I didn't feel anger when I thought about him anymore, just a sense of distance, like he was part of a story that no longer felt like mine. He reached out one last time, sending a simple email asking for forgiveness and admitting he'd been wrong about everything. About Vanessa, about me, about what we had together. He wanted to meet again, to talk, to find some kind of reconciliation. I didn't reply right away. I sat with his words for a while, letting them settle. Eventually, I wrote back, not because I wanted to rekindle anything, but because I knew I needed to put this chapter to rest once and for all. In my response, I kept it simple. Caleb, I appreciate your honesty. I've long since moved on from what happened between us, and I've built a life I'm proud of. I hope you can find your way forward too, but I've learned that some things are better left in the past. Take care of yourself. There was no malice in my words, no bitterness, just the truth. Caleb was part of who I used to be, but he didn't belong in the life I'd created for myself. And as I pressed send, I felt the weight of him finally lift off my shoulders. The next few years were a whirlwind of growth and opportunity. My company, once a fledgling dream, became a national brand, recognized for its innovative products and ethical practices. We opened offices in major cities, launched campaigns that inspired others to chase their dreams, and became a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. But it wasn't just about the business. My mentorship program for young women flourished, helping hundreds find their confidence and independence. Seeing their journeys reminded me of my own struggles and victories, and it filled me with a sense of purpose that went beyond profit margins or accolades. I traveled the world, meeting incredible people along the way. There were late-night brainstorming sessions with ambitious entrepreneurs in Tokyo, heartwarming conversations with small business owners in Paris, and even a mentorship retreat I hosted in Bali. Each experience added new layers to my life, reminding me that the world was vast and filled with endless possibilities. My days were full, but they were mine. I no longer answered to anyone but myself, and that freedom tasted sweeter than any victory. One quiet evening, I found myself revisiting my journals, the ones I'd started in those early days of my second chance. Flipping through the pages, I saw the messy scrawl of my hopes, fears, and plans. There were notes about stock market trends, reminders to stay patient, and even little motivational quotes I'd written to myself. One entry in particular caught my eye. It was from the first week after I'd woken up in the past, when everything still felt surreal and overwhelming. It read, "If you're reading this years from now, I hope you're living the life we always dreamed of. I hope you found happiness, freedom, and strength. And if you haven't, don't stop trying. You're worth the effort." Tears welled up in my eyes as I read those words. They weren't just a message to myself. They were a promise that no matter how hard things got, I would keep fighting. And now, sitting in my penthouse apartment with a thriving company, a supportive community, and a heart full of peace, I realized I'd kept that promise. I closed the journal and whispered, "Thank you," to the version of myself who had believed in me when it felt like no one else did. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the city skyline in shades of gold and pink, I stepped out onto my balcony. The air was crisp, carrying the hum of life from the streets below. I leaned against the railing, letting the moment wash over me. This was my life now. A life I'd built with my own two hands. A life no one could take away from me. I thought about Caleb, about Vanessa, about the person I used to be. And then I thought about the woman I'd become. Every betrayal, every heartbreak, every hard-won victory had led me here, to this moment of pride and peace. The past no longer haunted me. It was simply a part of the story that had shaped me into the person I was now. And as I watched the last rays of sunlight fade into the night, I felt nothing but gratitude. For the lessons, for the second chance, and for the courage to reclaim my power. I raised a glass to the sky, a quiet toast to the journey that had brought me here. And with a smile, I whispered to the universe, "This is just the beginning."